Madam Moderator, Prime Minister, Ambassadors, dear predecessor Klaus Töpfer, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, on revient toujours à ses premiers amours. I wholeheartedly and immediately accepted your invitation because I keep a very good and warm souvenir of my personal bilateral cooperation with the Scandinavian countries. It was more than 20 years ago when I served as a younger civil servant of the European Commission, when I was a member of our negotiating team to establish the European Economic Area and the later accession of Finland, Sweden, and, as we had hoped for, Norway to the European Union. And that was precisely when I realized there is a difference between a German special way and the Scandinavian way. Whenever, over the last 100 years, people were talking about a possible German Sonderweg, it was rather a matter of concern, as it was a matter of concern when people were talking about American Sonderweg and others. But whenever there were people talking about the Scandinavian way, it was really a matter of hope that you would be a pioneer group that would provide us others with the experience and the examples and the good practice we need to follow sooner or later your model. And this was true for the issue of equality of treatment between men and women. When I was employed in the European Commission in Brussels, I was surrounded by male colleagues, and sometimes we could find and detect a female head of unit or director in another unit far away from ours. But when the people from Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland arrived in Brussels, most of the heads of delegations were female colleagues of us, and this demonstrated what we had to do to catch up your advance in this respect. Later, in the 90s, we were so much impressed by your very ingenious way of financing social security schemes, not just by relying on contributions paid by employers and employees on wages, but collected amongst all citizens on equal basis in order to not damage the competitivity of your economy and the export industries. And whatever we have done ever since in order to rebalance our social security schemes in Germany, pension insurance, unemployment insurance, sickness insurance benefits, we have learned from the Swedish example. And once again, as far as the protection of the environment, as far as the sustainable energy supply is concerned, there is a lot we can learn from our neighbors in Scandinavia. So please tell us about your experience. Please tell us about the mistakes you have made in the 80s and 90s. Perhaps we can omit one or another of these mistakes in order to save time and to do it any better. The Energiewende we are talking about today and tomorrow has a triple stretching. First of all, it has a stretching with regard to Germany. Second, it has a meaning for Europe and for our neighboring countries. And thirdly, it has an international aspect that is very important. Let me start with the international aspect Prime Minister Lipponen has mentioned so rightly. We are talking for a number of years, for almost 20 years already, about international climate change and climate protection. We have achieved a lot with regard to the Kyoto Protocol almost 20 years ago. But we have suffered a lot of setbacks over the last couple of years. And I remember when I arrived in Rio de Janeiro for the Rio Plus 20 meeting, and I met Klaus Töpfer, who was already there and involved in international talks across the conference. Then he mentioned a very wise thing. He said, well, the difference between the first Rio summit and the second one 20 years later precisely is that the European voice is no longer as influential as it was before. And I have thought a lot why this happened. And the answer is, it happened because 20 years ago, Europe was able to offer some financial support. Today, we are rather running out of money ourselves. And secondly, most of the developing countries, most of the newly industrialized countries are no longer depending on our financial support. They are no longer interested in our financial support. They have a completely different interest, and the interest is the development of national economic growth of the GDP. And whenever these countries have to make a choice between economic growth on the one hand and environment protection and climate protection on the other hand, the choice has been made in the past merely in favor of economic growth and not in favor of environment and climate protection. This is reality, but it is also a matter of concern for the future. Because when you consider the perspectives of a world population of almost 8 billion people within a couple of years, when you consider the enormous growth potential, for example, of the Chinese economy, that is doubling every 10 years, in less than 10 years, and when you realize that most of the countries concerned in Asia, in Africa, are almost exclusively relying on fossil energy supply, then, dear colleagues and friends, you can imagine what it would mean for international climate if all of this economic growth would be fed by fossil energy consumptions. It would have an impact, an immediate impact on prices. And what we can see with regard to the oil prices, until the financial market crisis began, and now after we have overcome the banking crisis almost, is an enormous increase of oil prices within a relatively short period of time. And if it continues, it will have a severe impact on international economy. But the impact on climate change will be even bigger and faster. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we have to think about offers. We can make to other countries, not financial offers, but technological offers, how to combine economic growth with sustainable protection of the environment and the climate. If we can prove in Germany that a country that is number 3 or number 4 in the world as a highly industrialized, highly advanced country, that such a country can transform within a couple of years, within 20 or 30 years, almost its entire system of energy supply into a system that is merely based on renewable energies without losing competitivity, without falling back with regard to our main competitors elsewhere in the world, then of course this will serve as a model for developing countries and for industrialized countries as well, because it is a model that combines the promise of economic growth with the promise of sustainable protection of the environment. And this is exactly, Prime Minister, why I have taken an initiative to put forward the idea of an international renewables club, of a number of countries committed, strongly, severely committed, to the idea of renewable energies. And what we are doing in Germany in the first stage is intended to, I come back to that later, is intended to replace nuclear energies by renewable energies. But there are so many countries worldwide, African countries, Asian countries, where the implementation of renewable energies will not replace nuclear power plants, because these power plants do even not exist in those countries, but will replace old-fashioned oil, coal, and gas power plants polluting the environment and our atmosphere. And therefore, I have today handed over a letter to the Chinese ambassador. I have spoken to colleagues in the European Union. I'm using this opportunity over lunch we have had to discuss with responsible people from the Scandinavian countries. Let's put the issue of renewable energies on a higher rank in the international agenda. Let's address international public debate. Let's put forward the solutions we can offer, how to organize an integrated supply of renewable energies in countries where there is even much more sunshine and much more wind, much more biomass than in the European countries like Germany or France. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we should also consider the European perspective of it. I know, Prime Minister, that the decision that was taken in Germany to step out of nuclear energy production by 2022 and to transform our energy system into a renewable energy system, that was a decision that was taken merely unilaterally by Germany. And what we have forgotten, or what we could not do at that time, because it was a highly intensive public debate after the Fukushima incident, and me, as somebody who was involved in European politics for most of his life, I wholeheartedly regretted that we could not discuss the consequences and the impact of this with our European neighbors, friends, and colleagues. But I'm committed. I'm clearly committed as a minister competent for a part of this matter that we should now do what we have forgotten or omitted last year. We should now engage in a dialogue with our neighbors. And that was exactly what I discussed with the people in the Alp region, Switzerland, Austria, Italy, and France, and Monaco even is also an Alpine country. I'm offering this dialogue to our Scandinavian friends because I know how much we can learn from your experience. And even if you are not always so extroverted as some other people in Europe are, it is a way of considering problems and providing solutions that is very close to our German way in a good and in a positive sense. And therefore, I'm looking forward of developing these perspectives. And we should develop the European perspective not just by talking about it. We should develop that European perspective by extending the European energy market that exists for a part, but certainly not to the possible extent. And therefore, we should discuss what we can do in a technical aspect, to provide grid extension, to provide the necessary cables, as we have agreed with Norway recently, to provide a better interconnection between countries like France, Poland, Germany, Italy. Today, one of our very important and highly appreciated neighboring states, Belgium, has no electricity interconnection to Germany and vice versa. So we are in a very early stage as far as the technical market for European energy supply is concerned, and this is something we have to discuss and we have to amend. And secondly, we have to organize an exchange of best practices, of ideas, and we can learn from each other. And when I'm looking to Denmark and the Danish experienced ambassador, I can say as far as wind energy is concerned, we better should have listened to your experience as far as offshore wind energy supply is concerned, perhaps we would have been able to avoid some of the mistakes we have made in the past and where we have to pay for it now in order to ensure a good future. And then, of course, it has a national perspective for our country. It has a national perspective, ladies and gentlemen, because this German Energiewende certainly is the biggest economic challenge since post-war reconstruction, and it is certainly the greatest challenge for environmental and climate policy in our country we have ever faced. Sometimes it is perhaps a wise thing not to consider too intensively what we are going to decide and to do. Sometimes it is justified to jump into a decision because otherwise we would have been perhaps reluctant and anxious to take it. Now we have decided by a cross-party consensus last year, covering almost 80%, 90% of our parliaments, to transform our energy system. The energy system, by the way, that exists almost unchanged for more than 130 years. It was developed from Berlin on in Germany in the 1870s. The gas grid, the electricity grid. It was exported to other regions in Germany and elsewhere in Europe. It was based on gas and coal and later oil. It was completed by nuclear power for a number of years. And we have now decided to close down all our nuclear power plants by 2022. We have already closed down 8 of them last year, immediately after the Fukushima event. We have decided to reduce our energy consumption compared to 2008 by 10% until 2020, and even, I'm not sure whether this is realistic, and even by 50% by 2050. We will cover at least 80% of our energy supply from the renewables by 2050, and we are aiming at reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 80 to 95% compared to 1990 by the year 2050. These are ambitious aims and goals, and if we want to achieve them, we have to make sure that, especially in the beginning, everything is organized in a decent way that will help us to initiate a dynamic that can allow us to achieve these goals. I have no doubt that we will achieve the goal of closing down nuclear power plants by 2022. But, Prime Minister, as you have rightly said, we are neither preaching nor teaching others in Europe. This was a German decision that can be explained by the fact that in Germany the nuclear issue was the most controversial one of the national public debate for almost 40 years. It has divided the nation, it has decided elections, it has split political parties. I, as the chief whip of my group, I was involved in a decision 1 year earlier to extend the use of nuclear power plants by 14 years in average, but I witnessed as well the harmful debates we have had on the domestic scene, and therefore, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps sooner or later, such a debate has to come to an end. And I'm not judging whether it was the right or the wrong thing to do, especially not in the international context. But you know, Prime Minister, when in 20 years and 30 years' time from now on, when Klaus Töpfer, you and me are using our rollators in order to meet in a cafe unter die Linden, and then we have still time enough to discuss whether this was the right or the wrong decision. But in the meantime, we have to make sure, yes, in the meantime, we have to make sure that the consequences of this decision are duly implemented. And even if we are not preaching or teaching, what we see is an ongoing debate on nuclear energy in neighboring countries. And this is something that we are not interfering with. That is something where we are not playing an active role in it. But I have realized the new French government has announced its intention to reduce nuclear power share from 75 to 50% by the year 2040. I've seen similar debates in Switzerland, in Belgium, and it's up to each country to decide on it. But what we have to do in Germany is we have to stick to our decision and we have to implement the transition to an energy system that is based on renewable energies. The difference between Scandinavia and Germany precisely lies in the fact that you have different geographical and natural conditions. You have much more water energy available in your countries. You have much more biomass, especially in the forest. You have a very favorable environment for renewable energies. Germany is in a much more difficult situation. We have a highly dense population. We have a very electricity consuming industry, and this means even if we can learn from your experiences, some of the basic guidelines have to be developed taking into account the specific situation in our country. And therefore, we are in a process of discussing and debating what we have to do over the next couple of years. For the first time, over the last recent months and weeks, Energiewende has become the major issue of the political debate in Germany. Even last year, after Fukushima event, we were discussing the euro crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, the banking crisis, the transformation of our social security schemes, but now for the first time. And if you read the newspapers, already for 4 weeks, and today and tomorrow, you will see that the front pages are almost exclusively covered by this issue of Energiewende. And this is, from a democratic point of view, very good news, because it means it is no longer discussed within internal circles, but it is becoming a public debate that involves all stakeholders and that involves many, many actors on local, regional, and national level. As a Minister of the Environment, I have defined the criteria how to judge whether Energiewende is going to be a success. And in my eyes, there are 3 criteria that are important. I'm not the first one who has established the criteria. The first one is, of course, that is volume. That means that we have to achieve the 80% by 2050. And to be frank, we are advancing much faster on this road than everybody had expected. By the end of this year, 25% of the electricity supply of Germany will be produced of renewable energies. And it has an enormous technical impact on our countries. Germany is consuming 82 gigawatt electricity as a peak. For example, in January, when there is minus 15 degrees, all machines are turning and everybody is heating the apartments. In summer times, we are consuming less than half of this energy. Already today, we have an amazing amount of 30 gigawatt of solar energy in Germany, producing more than 25 gigawatt energy when there is a lot of sunshine in June or July. This is an unbelievable success, but it demonstrates the scope of the challenge. The scope of the challenge, because it means that in a warm someday in June, from 10 o'clock in the morning, the energy amount that is equal to 25 nuclear power plants suddenly arrives in the grid. And then it is available for 4 or 5 hours. No other energy is needed, no coal, no gas, no oil. And then when the sun is disappearing after the horizon, 25 nuclear power plants are disappearing within 3 or 4 hours from our grid. And this has to be balanced. This has to be integrated. We have to make sure that the wind energy that is produced in the north of Germany is available in the south of Germany, where the electricity is needed to feed our industries and our factories. We have to make sure that amongst the 16 federal states in Germany, there is a basic coordination of who is doing what with regard to the further implementation of nuclear energies. We have no centralized institution that could decide on what we are doing. And fortunately, we don't have it, because you cannot everything with regard to such an Energiewende decide on a political or state level. During the lunch, I explained to the ambassadors and ministers, I explained my first experience with a mobile phone in 1991 in Lapland. I never had seen such a device before. I arrived in Lapland for negotiations on social security for migrant workers. I never forget that day, because I could see a device that was very big, very heavy, quite stupid, but it allowed an independent conversation from wherever you were in Finland. And that was very impressive. But if we would have taken a decision on a master plan for the implementation of a mobile phone in the year 2020 in Europe, where nobody was aware of the internet, nobody was aware of UMTS, nobody was aware of the social media and networks that would arise in the meantime, the handy would perhaps half as big, half as stupid, but we would have missed 90% of the technological opportunities that we have discovered in the meantime. And this is a challenge for Energiewende in Germany. We have to provide stable framework conditions for Energiewende. But at the same time, we have to be open for technological developments in the future. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we have to keep into mind the framework of time that we need to implement Energiewende in Germany. We have, for very specific reasons, as you have done it in Finland, in Sweden, in Denmark, we have taken the year 2050 as a decisive year when we want to achieve our Energiewende in Germany. Why did we take the year 2050? It would be possible, of course, to implement 80% of renewable energies if we would continue exactly the pace of development as we have seen over the last 3 years. If we would continue that pace or even accelerate it, we could complete and achieve 80% by the year 2025 or 2030. But it would mean that we would miss a lot of technological innovation chances in the meantime, because we would implement rather old-fashioned solutions that exist already for years, and it would mean that we would produce the bulk of the costs that we have envisaged for a period of 30 years within a much shorter period of 10 or 15 years, and that would mean much higher costs within a shorter period of time. And therefore, this Minister of the Environment is arguing in favor of a rational approach, in favor of an approach that is very firm with regard to the aim of Energiewende as such and of renewable energies, but that is very flexible as far as the approach is concerned on the time range and where we should believe that even a city like Rome was not built at one single day, but it took some years to achieve what we can still admire today. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, what we need in Germany is a kind of national consensus. A kind of national consensus where we combine the implementation, the ongoing implementation of renewable energies with the extension of our grids. The extension of our grids is something that has been neglected in Germany as well as in the rest of Europe. and somebody has mentioned it. The grids are the most innovative part of our energy system, and they have deteriorated over the last couple of years instead of ameliorated. Therefore, without or with Energiewende, we have to make our grids better, and we have to make our grids more clever. Smart grids, smart meters, management of electricity demand and supply are the key words, and we are just in the beginning of the exercise. We have to consider possibilities for energy storage, for using wind power and solar power to fuel our electricity batteries for car mobility, or to convert it into power to gas in order to store energy that is produced in summer for consumption in autumn or in winter. All these has been neglected for so many years, and now we have to bring it all together. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an enormous challenge for all of us, but at least it's a challenge. And it is something you can work on, and it is something that will have an impact on the position of Germany in the European Union and in the wider world. I have no doubt that at the end of the day, by the year 2050, when we are all sitting with our roulators somewhere in Europe in a cafe, enjoying ourselves and discussing our political lifetime, ladies and gentlemen, it will be a success. But let me take an example. When I was a student, there was a prime minister in Bavaria, Franz Josef Strauss, almost forgotten in the meantime. And he decided to construct a new airport for Bavaria in Munich. And it was undertaken, it was realized, and at the day that was expected, the old airport was closed in the evening, and the new airport was opened in the morning. And this served as an example for the ability of German engineers and German logistics how to handle such projects. In recent times, you have had news about another airport in Germany. And ladies and gentlemen, it is my modest ambition to achieve what we call German Energiewende according to the first model and not to the latter one. Thank you so much for your attention.
Many, many thanks to Minister Altmaier for those very interesting and thought-provoking remarks. One question, if you would, please. Given where electricity prices are headed, you told us sometimes it's better to just take the plunge and jump, but the fact is when you jump at great velocity, you do get a backlash. How worried are you that we could see a backlash on the part of the ordinary citizens who are going to bear a disproportionate share of the burden of those rising prices, given the fact that we have a two-tier pricing system here in Germany?
Yes, as a responsible politician, I'm of course always worried. I'm not always showing it to the public, but I'm worried all the time. And for the first time that we have a two-tier price system for highly electricity-consuming industries on the one hand, and all the rest on the other hand, is of course something that is indispensable. It has been invented, by the way, by the Red-Green coalition government in the year 2000 already, because it allows us to bridge the gap between the moment where we are today, where electricity prices are rising for a number of years, and where we are hopefully in 20 years' time, when thanks to renewable energies, prices are slowing down again. And this is justified, but it means increased burdens for private persons. It means increased burdens also for medium-sized and small companies. And therefore, we have to work on solutions. One solution can be more energy and electricity efficiency for the business sector and the private sector. We are working very hard on this because this could be a relief, a short-time relief, and another relief would be if we could organize Energiewende in a cheaper way we have wasted a lot of time and money because we did not take into account the enormous demand for coordination between the different stakeholders and actors in the past. And if we could combine grid extension with extension of renewables, with cooperation of fossil energy producers, then we could save, I would say, almost half of the cost for the future, and this is something certainly worth working on it.
Thank you very much. We will pick up on a number of your themes in our discussion subsequently. Many thanks to you for being with us.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
It's a pleasure.